Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tamar Manuelian Atunch. I'm a visiting fellow here at Brookings, and it is my pleasure this morning to be moderating this panel, one of two panels that we'll be having this morning, following on from the very exciting introductory meeting that we had earlier this morning. The topic of conversation, which will really pick up on where the two leaders left, is on the importance of early childhood development as an investment. As we heard, in the future of our children, of our societies, an investment to reduce poverty, to promote inclusion, and to enhance productivity. So we'll continue that fantastic conversation that the two leaders of the two countries started. We have a wonderful panel to help us do that. And what I'd like to do is introduce the panelists, all of them at the same time. I think you have your bios, so I'm going to take the liberty of shortening their illustrious career, but you can certainly read the details of their lives. I'll start with James Wolfensohn. Jim Wolfensohn is chairman of Wolfensohn and Company, LLC. He was the president of the World Bank from 1995 to 2005, a period of 10 years, and my boss, I am proud to say, during those 10 years. And thereafter, he served for 1 year as special envoy for Gaza disengagement for the Middle East Quartet that consisted of the United Nations, the EU, the U.S., and Russia. Prior to his public service, Mr. Wolfensohn had a long and successful career in his own investment and advisory firm, as well as leadership positions at financial firms around the world. He's currently chairman emeritus of the boards of trustees of Carnegie Hall, the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, and the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. I'm introducing the panelists in the order in which they'll be speaking. Professor Lu Mai. Professor Lu has been Secretary General of China Development Research Foundation since 1998. Under his leadership, the foundation has organized many events and activities, including the China Development Forum. He was also the coordinator of the China Human Development Report in 2005, which received UNDP's 2007 Human Development Award for Excellence in Policy Analysis and Influence. Mr. Lu has extensive experience of rural reform in China and has been a distinguished researcher in many universities and research areas. He has worked at the Research Center for Rural Development of the State Council, at the Harvard Institute for International Development, at Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and at the Development Research Center of the State Council of China. Mr. Lu obtained a master's degree of public administration in 1991 from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Next, I'd like to introduce Santiago Levy. Santiago Levy is the Vice President for Sectors and Knowledge at the Inter-American Development Bank and previously Chief Economist there. He was General Director at the Mexican Social Security Institute from December 2000 to October 2005. And prior to that, from 1994 to 2000, Mr. Levy served as the Deputy Minister at the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit of Mexico, where he was the main architect of the now renowned social program, then Progresa, now Oportunidades, that benefits the poor. He held a PhD in economics and a master's in political economy from Boston University. He was a postdoctoral fellow at Cambridge University. Mr. Levy has advised several governments and international organizations and has held several teaching positions in Mexico and the US. He's the author of many books, at least 80 articles, monographs, and book chapters on diverse subjects, including poverty reduction, equity, competitiveness, foreign exchange policy, export imbalances, etc. And last but not least, Ms. Zhang Shikun. Ms. Zhang Shikun is the Director General of the Department of Maternal and Child Health Services in China since the establishment of National Health and Family Planning Commission in May 2013. In previous positions, she served as division head and deputy director of the Department of Publicity and Education. National Population and Family Planning Commission, and as Deputy Director and Director General of the Department of Science and Technology under the same commission. Ms. Zhang graduated from the Department of Clinical Medicine, Capital Medical University in 1983. She studied in the Department of Public Health and Administration at Peking Medical University in 1986 and received a master's degree in public administration from the School of Public Administration and Policy, Renmin University in 2003. So now let me turn to the heart of our discussions. What I'd be doing is asking each of our panelists a question that may have multiple parts and asking them to respond to that question in about 5 to 6 minutes. After we do this first round of questions that will come from me, I'd like then to open the discussion to the floor and get your comments and questions for the panelists, and then we'll end up with last words for each of the panelists before we wrap up. I'm hoping to do this section in 25 minutes or so that we'll have enough time for a good discussion from the floor, so I would appreciate it if all of you would please stick to the allotted time without me having to gesticulate widely to get you to stop. So let me start with Jim Wolfenson, if I may. Jim, you have been a tireless champion for reducing global poverty for many years, including certainly during your tenure at the World Bank. And I recall at the end of your tenure in 2005, you had been the instigator of the Poverty Reduction Conference that was held to bring together what we knew about how you take poverty reduction to scale. And fittingly, the conference was held in China, in Shanghai. You've also been a very powerful advocate for investing in children, and I recall very fondly, in particular, your focus and interest in the Roma community in Europe. So I want to ask you a few questions that link those two passions, your interest in reducing poverty and investing in children. But I wanted to start off first by asking you a personal question about where your interest in investing in children comes from. What is the origin of that long-standing personal interest and passion of yours? And then if you would please talk to us why you think this is such an important area for policymakers and the development community to support. And finally, if you would just tell us your thoughts on the place of ECD in the post-2015 development architecture. Secretary Clinton touched upon it briefly, but it would be good to get your views on it as well. Jim.
Well, in 6 minutes, that's quite a lot to answer. But the origin of my interest is that I had 3 kids. And the particular stimulus came from my wife, who has developed some reputation in this field of early child development. We went together to a little more countries than Secretary Clinton. We went to 140, so I'm feeling a little chuffed this morning that we outdid her, at least in one area, though not by any means in substance. But I think that what I concluded in relation to this morning was very important, and I think it is that if one is looking at the future cannot be built without building it on the next generation. It's really very simple. And one of the things which came out this morning, and with which I have complete agreement, is that if you miss the first 5 years, you can't pick it up. If you say that you'd like to pick it up from years 6 to 10, it's not possible, because the kids are so significantly formed in those first 5 years. And the notion that you don't have to speak to children, that you don't have to stimulate the children, is just quite false. And what is interesting to me is that in my period at the bank, which spanned 10 years, the first 5 years, I regret to say that early child development didn't get much of a show, not by us and not by the countries that we were dealing with. This morning we heard about the United States, and we heard of the extraordinary progress that has been made in China. And I think both were very important. But what worries me the most is the way the demographics are going in the world, and not including China and not including the United States. Although, of course, China has an immense possibility in terms of an expectation in terms of its growth, alongside India, which at some point in the next 10, 20 years might even exceed China. But I worry particularly about the least developed countries. They're growing at a significant pace at the moment. You have LDC populations now maybe of 870 million. By 2025, there'll be 1.7 billion. That means that you're going to have a $900 million addition. The addition at some point in their lives will be early children. And the question is, what's going to happen with them? If you just take Africa with 53 countries, and for those of you that have traveled in Africa, you will know that the priorities that people are giving at first is get some food, get a location to live. And that's not surprising. And too often I've seen in the 53 countries that the issue of educating the kids becomes not a top priority, even though it might be done simultaneously, it gets forgotten. And it's very worrying when you think that by 2050, Africa will be 20% of the world. And if you have 20% of the world where a significant portion of the development process has been missed or underappreciated, it means that you'll have 20% of the world coming along with a very substantial percentage of the population. It'll be 40% in those developing African countries under the age of 15 and 70% under the age of 30. This is a huge issue, not just for Africa, it's an issue for the world. And if you add to that a multiplicity of issues arising from having 53 countries and no organized development between them, I worry tremendously in that single case, and I could, if I had more than 6 minutes, I could extend it, but I'm just taking one particular issue, just taking 20% of the world with 53 countries, with a population 40% under the age of 15 and 70% under the age of 30. And they're part of the world, they're 20% of the world. And we have to ensure that those countries understand what we are learning, which is what you can stimulate the kids to do in those first 5 years is pivotal. And if you don't deal with that, then you have a population which for its life is going to be behind other countries in the world which give that stimulus. So this is not just a theoretical issue. This is an issue, for me, of global stability. And it's an issue of poverty, of course, because poverty comes with lack of knowledge and lack of an ability to create an income-earning life for oneself, assuming that the leaders give an environment in which that's possible. And that's not always possible, I regret to say, in some of the organization of governance in Africa. So just taking, given the limitation of time, just think about the African situation. You have 20% of the world with a huge young population, not getting stimulated, will be the lowest per capita income globally, and you'll have 53 governments trying to deal with it. That is not just a fringe issue of some part of the world that you could forget. This is 20% of the world. And by 2060, it'll be 25% of the world. So I raise this issue of early child development because if you are not dealing in that segment of the world with the issue of maximizing the potential of these young people, which means giving them the stimulus in those early years, and they have a fraction of the statistics that the Vice Premier gave this morning in terms of institutions that are being set up. I wouldn't think that in the entire continent of Africa you would have a tenth of what is being done in China. And it is not just an African question, because the last thing is we're all living in the same world. And so what will affect us dramatically is those decisions. And I think early child development becomes something that is not just an educational issue. It becomes an issue of economics, but it also becomes an issue of global stability. And it's what worries me for my kids.
Thank you very much, Jim. And I know we'll have an opportunity to come back to you for more.
But it was 6 minutes.
Thank you. Professor Lu Mai, we all know that China has made tremendous progress in poverty reduction in the last 3 decades and contributed immensely to the unprecedented improvement that the world has witnessed in the lives of poor people globally. Just to cite a few numbers, in 1981, 1.9 billion people were estimated to be poor globally, with China home to 835 million people, or about 44% of the world's poor. By 2010, the numbers of poor people globally had declined to 1.2 billion, with China now home to 157 million people, or only 13% of the world's poor. Put differently, China alone accounted for 93.7% of the overall decline in the number of people living below the poverty line in the last 3 decades. A remarkable achievement indeed. My questions to you, and it's a 2-part question again. Would you please explain to us the role of early childhood development in reducing poverty and lowering inequality going forward in China? Because we know that the tremendous progress in poverty reduction has also been accompanied by increasing inequalities in income and in some other dimensions as well. And second, China is also famous for its approach to policies in terms of conducting pilots, learning from them, and then scaling up the successful ones among them. So what lessons are there to be learned from the current ECD pilot programs and initiatives for national policymaking in China?
Thank you, Tamar. CDIF is very honored to have this event with Brookings. So thanks, Tamar. From Brookings side, we work together. In China, in the last 30 years, due to the economic growth, but also government policy to the poverty alleviation, the people living under poverty line reduced. This basically is due to, first, investment in the rural area, and the second is poverty alleviation. But recent years, we realized we need to emphasize more on the education. Governments increase the spending in the rural area for the health and for the education. But for the earlier child period, the government recently realized it needs to do more. We found that in the urban area by 2010, the survey shows the stunting is 3.4% for urban children under year 5 years old. But in the poor rural area, it's 20%. So the gap between the rural and the urban is huge. In the urban, 3.4 means it's almost like United States. But in the rural area, 20% the stunting rate means we're very close to South Africa. So, and when we started to do the experiment, we did the baseline test. It also shows the mental development, the psychological test, the language, the cognition, the memory, compared with the rural kids in the mountain area, with the kids in the kindergarten. The difference is huge. In the rural, the memory is just 20% compared with the urban, the kids in the kindergarten. And the language and the cognition is 40%, 6%, just like Secretary Clinton mentioned. So we need to find a way, not generally for the economic growth, not generally say invest in infrastructure, but target in this group. And they live in the mountain area, remote area, in those poverty area. So we need to find a way. First, we learned that from a developing country, including United States, about the theory. Earlier child development is so important. They have knowledge about the brain, and those knowledge is very important for our experiment. And the second, we need to find a Chinese way. U.S. methodology is fit in U.S. situation, but the cost is a little bit high. $7,000 US dollar per one kid per year for preschool education. We cannot afford that. So we organize our nutrition intervention and preschool education in remote area by the principle. First, it should be universal coverage. Second, it should be affordable. Third, quality, it should be controlled. And we send a volunteer teacher to the village to teach these kids. And we distribute the 营养包. Professor Chen Chunming, that's the key. She will talk about that. It's just 10 cents per day per kids. So there's two methodology we import in our experiment, and the result is very good. And we also have a nutrition intervention for pregnant women and the mama school. So the expenditure is relatively very low. So $150 US per kids per year for the preschool education, $30 per year for the nutrition intervention. And the result is totally changed their life. They catch up. Now they're by memory and by language, they are 80 to 90% compared with the urban. And also the nutrition. They significantly reduce the malnutrition. So that's something we would like to discuss here. In the future, I think with U.S. academic support and with our experiment, we should follow those experiments, see after 10 years, after 20 years, what happened. And this research will benefit to Africa with cooperation together. So,
Thank you, Professor Liu. Certainly very encouraging, and we'll pick up on the collaboration issue in the next panel on this topic, in particular among researchers. I'll now turn to Santiago Levy. Santiago, I have a two-part question for you as well, but clearly, as previous speakers have done, you're welcome to ignore any part of it that you like. Could you please tell us about the role of early childhood development as an instrument of social policy, especially in Latin America, a region that is well known for its high levels of income and social inequalities, but also in recent years for its innovative approaches to social policies, and indeed some recent successes in fostering inclusion. The second part of the question is I'd like you to comment on how it is that early childhood development seems to be high on the policy agenda in many Latin American countries. That's certainly the impression I get from talking to my former colleagues who work in the region. While in other countries and regions, it still remains a struggle to get it on the policymakers' agenda and to get them to see it as an effective investment.
So thank you, Tamar. On the first part of your question, I think we put this in a process. What I think Latin America has done is, from the mid-1990s, a set of new social programs evolved, and they allowed to make important progress in terms of poverty alleviation. But there was a realization that these programs, even though they were allowing more kids to go into school and allowing healthier kids to go into school, the outcomes in terms of learning were not as expected. So attention turned from, it is not enough to stimulate parents to send their children to school. If by the time the children enter school at 5 years of age, as Jim was saying, their previous development was insufficient, even though these programs are successful in getting children to go to school, the returns to school are not going to be there. And what has happened in the region is that there's accumulated evidence that the first impact of these programs were very positive in terms of school attendance, but they were disappointing in terms of the actual learning that was taking place. So that clearly motivated the discussion as to what needs to be done. Not all the attention has been centered on early child development, because part of the attention has to do with the poor quality of education that these children are getting. There's a difference between making kids go to school and then getting to school with a good teacher who's actually going to make you teach. And there's a big challenge in terms of quality of education. But it was also a realization that part of the equation, yes, was these kids are getting into school with important deficiencies instead of vocabulary, language, cognitive abilities, non-cognitive abilities, and we need to do something about that. So, mutatis mutandis, more countries faster than others. There's been an important effort in the region to try to incorporate early child development as part of the agenda. I put Chile probably at the top of the countries that have done that. Colombia is making a major effort to do that. Brazil to a lesser extent. The news are mixed. We still haven't found the right intervention, and Mr. Mai's comments were very interesting in that respect. Basically, 3 models have been tried in the region. A region of sending children to daycare centers. These are very expensive models. These are difficult to scale up. A model in which children are pulled together in a community, and some mother is given some training to actually give some child stimulation. Results are mixed. And a model which is even cheaper, in which information is given to parents that, in fact, child stimulation is very important, buying them toys, and sort of talking to them and speaking to them. And again, the results are mixed. So what I would say is that the region is at a point in which there's a recognition that early child development is very important, that it needs to be a complement, not a substitute, to the other social programs, that a model to actually deliver this is not there yet, that scalable interventions, a point that Jim, when he was president of the World Bank, very rightly so put a lot of emphasis. We don't want a nice little example here that's very pretty. We want something that is massive and reaches a large number of people. The region doesn't have that model. The Chinese experience is interesting for us. There's also a realization that the region is making a mistake in terms of the efforts of fighting inequality, and I come to the second part of your question. If you look at the allocation of the budget, the amount of resources that are being allocated to old age pensions of poor people relative to the amount of money that is being allocated to early child development is completely unbalanced. The political economy here is pretty perverse because it acts against allocating more resources to early child development, but it's incredibly inefficient from an intertemporal point of view because you're trying to combat inequality at the end of the life cycle when these people had very poor productivity throughout their life cycle, whereas if you made the investments much earlier, then probably these investments at the end of life cycle would not need to be done. The region has not come yet to this realization. The political economy is pushing in the wrong direction, so there are insufficient amount of resources allocated to early child development, and there's not a model that we can say this is the way to do it. That said, a lot of experimenting is going on. A lot of impact evaluations are being carried out. Many multilateral agencies are trying to put this on the agenda. And I'm optimistic that over the next 3-5 years, hopefully the importance of this in the policy agenda will increase, number one. And secondly, by then, hopefully we will have a model that is useful, scalable, and cost-effective. That's where I stand now.
Very good. Thank you very much, Santiago. Certainly, Latin America is not the only region, I believe, to have this problem with the political economy of who votes and who does not, and therefore how that influences decisions around allocation of resources. That is a major political challenge for this particular area of intervention. Last but not least, Madam Zhang, I don't feel so badly about introducing you or asking you the question last in this panel, given the prominence that women had earlier on. So, Zhang Nushe, how importantly does ECD feature in the policies of the Chinese government? And we certainly heard from the Vice Premier about the importance of those policies. Maybe you can expand on it from your perspective. And also tell us a little bit more about how the government is translating the importance it attaches to this agenda into efforts on the ground to enhance access to quality interventions in early childhood. And what are some of the challenges that the government is facing in this area?
Okay, thank you, Tamar, for your excellent questions. But first, I want to thank the China Development Research Foundation and the Brookings Institution for organizing this seminar, which is of strategic importance. And early childhood development is a very important topic, and to pay attention to this topic is to also to pay attention to the future of humanities. And we believe that health is the most important cornerstone in terms of early childhood development. Without health, it's meaningless to talk about development. That's why the Chinese government has paid a lot of attention to the health-related issues in early childhood development. And China is the most populous developing nation in the world. We have over 300 million children that fit into this category that needs early childhood development. So to improve their health is a very important part of the work. So from China's perspective, I believe to pay attention on health element in early child development, I think there are three parts of the work. One is to improve our laws and regulations. So the Chinese government has been continuously working on improving the various laws and regulations to protect the women's rights and the children and newborns and etc. So on national level, we have a very comprehensive legal framework to provide legal foundation for ECD. And the second aspect is to improve the hospitals and healthcare facilities, including the standardization of quality and management of clinics, providing services for pregnant women and delivery and birth. And that would also provide a very good foundation for ECD. And through undertaking those tasks, or there are two actually statistic numbers that are very sensitive and also very important and illustrative on women. One is infant morbidity. The other is the mobility of those under 5 years old. And the first number has dropped to 1.03%, and the other has dropped to 1.3%
And the WHO announced to the world last year that China has now effectively dealt with the issue of the diseases that, like the diseases that can be gotten from rusty needles when women are pregnant, like tetanus. They have now, this has been announced to the world by the WTO right now, that China has solved these problems effectively. And we have been working harder to be more fair, including fair to those women in the countryside postpartum and during the process of giving birth, to try to make it more fair between the countryside and the cities. And we're giving free services to them as well as poor areas. We have been giving free screenings, and we have certain lines of the poverty level, and if they're up to a certain poverty level, we are giving them nutrition packets, and we are providing those to children in rural areas so that we can provide more support for children in these areas who are disadvantaged to begin with. And also we have health management programs for children from the ages of 0 to the age of 6, as well as inoculations and immunizations for these very young children so that they will be able to effectively fight against these diseases that can be protected by the inoculation. So we want to give them justice, and we want to be fair to these children because we are the most populous developing country. So we have so many challenges that we face right now, and a lot of these challenges actually affect the health of our children, like low weight births, as well as pneumonia. And some of these issues are issues that we're working on, including the harms that are done to these children as accidents that occur that affect their health, as well as birth defects. We had in the past a high birth defect rate for newborns, and it was a very, very high level. But we have been bringing down the number of those birth defects because our economy is developing and we are carrying out urbanization. So now we also have modern diseases that affect them, just like obesity, as our vice premier was telling you about just now, childhood obesity, as well as overweight children. And we have psychological issues, and this affects them psychologically as well, and that affects their healthy growth. So we have to work harder on early childhood education, especially through this type of a strategic dialogue. We'd like to get to know more what you are doing in the United States. We'd like to know more about your good experiences, successful experiences from all around the world to help our children in China achieve early childhood development better, so that we can let all children be healthy, let all children be happy, and make our world more beautiful and make it a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you in particular for highlighting the importance of maternal health, because when we talk about the early years for children, we all know that we're starting, that early life starts in utero. So the extreme importance of ensuring that women are healthy prior to and during pregnancy. We've done relatively well, so we have about 15-20 minutes for the next segment of this discussion. I'd like to ask you to raise your hand, and there are mics somewhere. Yes, the mic will be coming to you. I'd like to take a few questions at a time. Feel free to direct your question to a particular member of the panel if you like, and introduce yourself very briefly, and let's make sure that there's a question mark at the end of it, of your statement. Thank you. Okay, yes.
This is a question for Dr. Levy. What's the status of the research on the effects of oportunidades on young children and their welfare?
The lady right behind? Yes, please. Do introduce yourself, sorry.
Sorry. Florence Davis from the Star Foundation.
Zhu from Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. I'd like to ask the question to Mr. Orphanson, that you made a very good point about the least developed countries. Then my question is that in those countries, what is your idea? The intervention is targeted or universal? And second question to Mr. Levy about Latin American. You're talking about resource allocation between early childhood development and other education. And what is the idea about the role of families? Because in China, if they're in the kindergarten, this is one model for all children. and also teach them too much than to intervene or envision the family role in the education. What is your idea? Thank you.
Yes, please.
Hi, Jane Tom from Taisha Media. My question is for Mr. Wolfenson. And what do you think is the mature system for early child development, and what is the NGO government's interaction with this development? And for 张司长，我有个问题想问你，就是
For Ms. Zhang, my question is, in China, we're working very hard on early childhood education and development, and we're doing a lot of investments in that area. Right now, what they're trying to do is increase early cognition of these issues, especially in the countryside, and whether or not there can be a successful transition. Can you tell us what your plan is to achieve that? Thank you.
One more? Please.
我来自于中国。
I come from China's Women's Development Foundation, and we mostly work with women and children and work on their development issues. In early childhood development, what you have to do is help the mothers in poor areas and work together with the mothers and the children. So we are working in this society. We've been doing that for a lot of time, and we have had these types of ideas. We're trying to work on a lot of issues with mothers in poor areas, and we're trying to give them more time to be with their children and teach their children. We've been having some programs toward that end because they work so hard to survive that they don't have a lot of time for that. We're trying to give them those services, and we have our little teachers, our little cradles. We're trying to use all of these types of programs to help us have better preschool teachers in these rural areas, including to let these moms know more and better about what they can do in the process. These are our types of things that we are just throwing out there and experimenting with and working on right now. And I'm so happy to participate in this conference and to be able to tell everybody a little bit about that, as well as get to know about what's going on in the world in early childhood development and education. I have two questions here. First of all, for Mr. Wolfenson, we know that you know quite a bit about China and that you have been to Gansu and you've worked with some of our women's groups, at least you've exchanged with them on issues. And looking at the situation as it currently exists in China today, to work more in early childhood development, what do you suggest we do? And also, Mr. Lu Mai, looking at social organizations and what they do to promote ECD, how can we participate better and for better results? I want to know what great suggestions you might provide us with. Thank you.
Why don't we take those questions? There were some specific ones addressed to particular panelists, especially the one on progress, what the results are for children that Santiago will certainly pick up. A number of questions that I think many of you are well placed to provide your opinions on. The one on targeting versus universal, I think it would be helpful to hear from many of you, from all of you who are interested in responding to that. I think it's an important question. The role of civil society, and a very simple question to you, Jim, about what should China do when it comes to early childhood development. And there was an emphasis in one of the comments about these two-generation models. I think that's how they are termed in the community, working jointly with mothers and children, and the place of that. What you may have found, Professor Liu, in your research about the robustness of those kinds of models. So let's start maybe from Santiago and move this way.
So thank you for the questions. I'll take a few, and there's a lot of research that is accumulated not only from Oportunidades in Mexico, but from many other similar programs in Latin America and other parts of the world. In a sentence, these programs have been very successful in terms of increasing school attendance of lowering dropout rates, of ensuring school progression. They've also been successful in increasing enrollment rates for girls more than for boys, which was a problem in the region about 10 years ago, with girls going to school less than boys. And they've also been successful in terms of some basic health indicators, morbidity and mobility. The evidence about deeper learning is not so optimistic. We do have now some evaluations that say that even though these children are going to school more often and they're staying in school longer, by the time they're coming out of school, their cognitive abilities are measured, say, by the PISA result exams and all that, are still substantially below the mean of the local population. So there's a major challenge in terms of the quality of education that they're getting. And that challenge has sort of two parts. One is, perhaps by the time they're coming to school, they're already coming with lags, and this is the real importance of early child development. But also, it might also be that even though they're going to school more often, the quality of the education, because of the teachers and other deficiencies, is not what it is to be. Let me briefly take the second question on the role of the family. This is a very, very important question. Mrs. Clinton touched on it in her intervention this morning. There's some things that you can do through child care centers and child interventions, but the very first 2 years, the role of the family is absolutely central. What has happened in many Latin American countries, particularly in rural areas, is that women have their children very early on. They have too many children, sometimes 6 or 7 children, not sufficient spacing between children, so that the emotional affection that they can give to the children is insufficient. We've made progress in terms of the nutritional deficiencies that these children are facing. Programs like Oportunidades have helped in this dimension, but these programs cannot substitute what goes on in the home in the first 2 years. So there's a major challenge in terms of educating the mother that children need to be played with, talked to, they need to be given toys, and they need more affection as part of their development. And just very, very briefly on the universal versus targeted, ideally, one wants these programs to be universal. The fact of the matter is that the lags are not evenly distributed across all income groups. The biggest lags, the evidence shows, is for people that are poor, particularly in rural areas. And because there's resource constraints, realistically, at least in some cases, you've got to begin by targeting those areas in which these programs will have the greatest effects. And that means rural areas or suburban areas of the large metropole where these deficiencies are deepest.
Thank you, Santiago. Professor Lu?
Yes. For the issue of two methodology, I agree with Santiago. Earlier care, we need to help a family, help parents to understand how it is important. Mary Young is our senior fellow, and she did a lot of work to prepare this. She will help us to do the further experiment on this part. But for preschool education, we think about both methodology, home visiting and center-based. For center-based, actually, they ask the volunteer teacher, it's not so high quality. They do not need them to be a college graduate, but they have a high school education. That's enough. So we think about that and think about the cost efficiency. For preschool education, we base on the center in the village. The second issue about the different organizations can play some role to help poor people, especially in the earlier child development. I think that's very important. And your organization and many other, like a Poverty Alleviation Foundation, we did together many work. But for our foundation, one thing we always think about, government policy and the government financial resources is much powerful than a small organization. So we did an experiment. We measured the result, and we sent the suggestion to the government. I think they make a good decision, can affect. For example, our experiment now have covered 40,000 kids in 9 counties. But the government decided they want to take over, just like Vice Premier said. That will benefit 40 million of kids. So different, quite different scale. That's what we want to do.
Thank you. Jim?
I think I have these three questions, and they're in a way linked. My own judgment is that we need somehow to get to the leaders of the developed and developing countries, an understanding that early child development is not a fringe issue. Right. It is a central issue. If one could deal with the issue of early child development and improve the contribution that the kids could make, all the evidence suggests that they'll be, first of all, greater producers, and secondly, cost you less in terms of the educational process. It's a very straightforward economic argument. But the trouble is that as you look at G7 and G20 meetings, I don't think there has been a single occasion on which this issue has been raised. And yet it is a hard economic issue. Right. It is an important economic issue in terms of global stability, and no one talks about it. And the evidence all points to the fact that if one could deal with this issue and put it on the agenda, not in 1 year, but over 5 years or 10 years, you could change the way our planet works. And I believe that it is necessary for 1 or 2 or 3 countries to try and take a lead in putting this issue on the agenda. And it may well be that China could be the country that does that. You have taken an important lead in terms of your own students. You may not be there entirely, and you are very modest about your achievements, but the achievements are enormous. And I think that if somehow we could bring together 2, 3, or 4 of these leaders, or go through their, I was going to say go through their wives, but let's go through some of the women leaders as well, and start with Germany, and start with wherever we now have some women leaders, and because of their greater sensitivity perhaps to this. I think one of the great contributions that could be made would be to get this issue as a global issue. It's not an electoral issue for the next 2 or 3 years, but it is a hugely important issue in terms of global stability and global economics. Because if you don't maximize the potential of the people in these first 5 years, all the evidence suggests that they make less contribution and they cost you more. I believe that's correct. And if that is correct, we should get it on the table. And I think you should do it. You're bringing Brookings into the 21st century. Why don't you bring the world?
Okay, Professor Liu, you have your job cut out for you for the next decade now. Madam Zhang.
好，对于儿童
Okay. As for ECD, I think it's about their mental health and their physical health and their abilities. That includes education and it includes health. Those are the most important things. The woman next to me was talking about the West part of China as well as the nutrition, the woman that asked the question. She was asking how much money we need to put into that, and I think that this is what I would say. There are like 680 different areas where we have these nutrition packets, and we're spending over 300 million RMB.
And if we can expand our coverage and on annual basis, the investment we'll be making will be over 1 billion RMB. So right now we have close to 1,000 billion investment in RMB to overall children's development. So we believe that this kind of investment is the smartest and is the most valuable investment, because if we invest in those children on their health and on their education, that is equal to investment in our nation's future. So the Chinese government is going to continue to expand investment in this area to contribute more to the development of Chinese children.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was hoping to do another round of questions, but I'm afraid the time is up. But we benefited from rich reflections and responses from our panelists, and I was also going to ask them for their last words if they had any, but I feel Jim has already given us his, and it's a big one for us all to digest and move on. So please thank with me our panelists for their wonderful contributions.
Good morning to you all. My name is Fang Jin. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of CDRF, one of the co-organizers for this event. I think we've had a very successful opening session and a very productive first session earlier. Both Vice Premier Liu Yanzhong and Secretary Clinton, the panelists, all spoke about the importance of early childhood development and also the need of cooperation between China and the U.S. in this area, which is the topic of discussion for this session. Before David kicks off the discussion, I would like to make a few observations of my own on the subject. First, early childhood development is still a relatively new concept in China. Despite the tremendous progress we have made, our entry into this area, to a large extent, has been inspired by the theory and practice developed by other countries, including those by the U.S. We are still at a very early stage of developing an integral ECD program in China. There's still a lot we can learn from other countries. Second, I think even though the U.S. Probably doesn't have the best ECD policy in the world, I think that prize will probably goes to some Scandinavian countries, but you do have the best researchers and research institutes in the world. I think Vice Premier Liu Yanzhong said earlier that we can have collaboration in research on ECD programs, and you can introduce your latest development and theory to us, or we can study the impact or effectiveness of ECD programs in China together. Thirdly, even though China is still a developing country with huge unbalanced development across different regions, but I do think China has a particular advantage at its disposal. Chinese government has ample resources, and it is willing to experiment and try. So if it is committed to accomplish something, it will mobilize all available resources to get things done. So even though I think China is still a latecomer in ECD, but I'm very confident China will catch up really fast, which will present opportunities for international cooperation. Last but not least, I do hope this dialogue between China and the US on ECD continues well into the future. Not only because children are important, and this will be a perennial topic for discussion, but also because this dialogue fills an important void and will contribute to a better understanding of the two peoples. Secretary Clinton once famously said that the relationship between China and the US is the most important bilateral relationship in the world. I hope this dialogue will not only serve to improve the welfare of children in the two countries, but also becomes an integral part of the overall dialogue between China and the US. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Dollar, a senior fellow in the John L. Thornton China Center here at Brookings. And I'm going to moderate this panel with the august title of U.S. China Engagement and Collaboration on ECD Policy Implementation and Evaluation. And so it's really about U.S. China collaboration, and that can be at a very high or global level, and it can also be at a grassroots level, and I think we'll get into both. We have an extraordinary panel with amazing experience, and you have their bios, and so in the interest of time, I'm going to give very short introductions. I'm going to follow the same pattern we had in the last panel. I'm going to ask each of them one question to start things off, starting down at the end and moving this way. But let me introduce all of them briefly, and you have the details. Larry Aber there at the end is professor in psychology and public policy at New York University. He's the chair of NYU's Institute of Human Development and Social Change. He has a long list of publications in the general area of child development and social policy. Next to him is Professor Chen Chung-Ming. I love the fact that Chen Chung-Ming's biography begins by saying that she began nutrition study in 1947. She is truly a fixture in Chinese nutrition and health policy. She designed China's nutrition monitoring system, led the Children Nutritional Monitoring Program for 20 years. She was the founding dean of China's Center for Disease Control and Prevention, long history of activism in child nutrition and health issues. Robert Duggar. Robert Duggar's main interest is early childhood development and organizing strong state business coalitions to support high return investment spending in children prenatal to 5. He founded Ready Nation, which is an important non-governmental organization, so he brings the perspective of the private sector and the non-governmental sector to this discussion. He participated in founding the Institute for New Economic Thinking. I love that title. We definitely need new economic thinking. And Rob heads that institute's global working group on human capital and economic opportunity. And then last but not least, we have here next to me Madam Jiang Jin, and she is the Deputy Director of the Office of Pre-Primary Education in the Ministry of Education. So she is responsible for the management of pre-primary education in China, organizing the development of policy on pre-primary education. She's long been responsible for organizing and implementing the Early Childhood Development Program, which is a joint effort of China's Ministry of Education and the United Nations Children Fund. So we really have an extraordinary wealth of talent up here. So let me start with Larry. And as I said, we want to talk both at the global and the grassroots level. So the question I want to start with Larry is really at that global level. I think both of our leaders this morning made some reference to Millennium Development Goals, the global agenda. We're talking about, Secretary Clinton in particular raised the post-2015 development agenda. So how do you see early childhood development fitting into that agenda? Is how can the United States and China work together to bring this issue into the agenda?
Well, thank you, David, and I'm so glad to be here. Great question, and all of you know that the Millennium Development Goals really did change the world in many ways. The nations of the world made a commitment to poverty reduction, and China's singular contribution to that poverty reduction is stunning. They also made a commitment to universal primary education. Those types of goals that are shared by nations, enormously concrete and actionable, can make a difference. So the early childhood community in many parts of the world has been thinking about post-2015 development goals and whether and how an early childhood goal could become part of that. So Joan Lombardi, my colleague and dear friend in the back, and I wrote a little piece that's at the front table called a new global development goal for the world's youngest children. It was very exciting to hear today Secretary Clinton mention early childhood as part of what should be considered as part of the post-2015 development goals. It was very exciting to hear Jim Wolfenson say, turn to his Chinese colleagues and say, maybe you're the country to champion this. And we deeply believe that if China and the U.S. could together speak toward an early child development goal, that would be when two of the most important, powerful, influential countries of the world would make an advance like that, that could really change the world. We've spoken today so far about the importance of early childhood development for domestic policy. And early childhood development, though, is very important to both countries' foreign policy as well. And so it was mentioned once or twice, but as, again, Mr. Wolfenson described, the early childhood development challenges in Africa and in South Asia are enormous, and this kind of development goal could really help China and the United States operate in a different way, collaboratively, collectively together around that. One other thing that I'll say about these global goals is now is the time to act. The Sustainable Development Solutions Network is working on reports that will go through an open working group that go to Ban Ki-moon and for deliberation globally. The 8th session of the open working group is February 6th. And nations of the world, the only way to really get a goal on the agenda is for country leaders to bring that goal to the agenda. That open working group is co-chaired, for instance, by Hungary and Kenya. Again, if China and the United States brought that kind of goal, or if China and any other leading country, or the United States and any other leading country brought that goal, it would make a big difference. It sounds global. It really boils down into on-the-ground activities. The poverty reduction goals and the primary, universal primary education goals have made tangible differences on the ground in millions and millions of people's lives all over the world. Final thing I'll say, and you can give me this, Dave, when I'm out of time, but the final thing I'll say is that in the United States, it was very kind for the opening comments of this session to say that the United States has some of the best researchers in the world and research scientists. That's my day job is a research scientist at NYU. I think that we know so much about early child development. We are beginning to know what works and what doesn't in different countries, but there's still a lot to learn, very important things to learn. There's huge, what's called heterogeneity in the impact and the results of early childhood programs. It helps some children and not others. Even the successful ones that are successful on average help some children, not others. How do we learn for them to help all children? So we need to know not only does it work on average, but for whom, by what mechanisms, and under what contexts. And those three questions, by whom, by what mechanisms, and under what contexts, constitute a very worthy science policy agenda in early childhood going forward over the next decade. So I think that both, not only in domestic policy, which was emphasized so far today, but in foreign policy and in science policy, early childhood is critical, and the opportunity for collaboration between Chinese government, philanthropy, universities, the business sector, and those in the United States are unparalleled. I think we're on the threshold of a remarkable decade.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate that you started at the global level and then brought it down to the grassroots. Now I'm going to like to ask a question for Professor Chun. Given your long history working on nutritional issues in China, wish you could share some thoughts about the relationship between child nutrition and early childhood development. And then given the progress that we've seen in China, what do you see as the real policy agenda now? What is the priority for policy in China now in your area?
Thank you. Because I'm a nutritionist. So as a nutritionist, we are always been the technical support for policy making. So for us, firstly, we have, as a nutritionist, we firstly do all these surveillance, nutrition surveillance for children under 5, along with the economic development. because we have a 20 years data, we can identify what is the problem and who is the focus population. So then we do the research to find out how to solve the problem for the focus population, which is suitable to China's condition, culturally and economically and environmentally. So in that case, we find this one called 营养包, that is a nutrient-dense, fortified complementary food supplement. So this one is very, very effective since Dr. Lu Mai talked about it. And that is solve the problem for the children in the poor area. And we have the research, then the process to do the research. Then after the research, you find out it is effective. Then we have to do the application and field experiment. So moreover, to do the scaling up of such intervention from hundreds of people and to about 30 million children as a community trial. Mm-hmm. So in that case, we finally find out that is very effective. Firstly, reduce the stunting rate. From if you look at the in the county study, which was held by Dr. Lu Mai, and in one county we have half population to use the intervention, and we find out a stunting reduction at age of 2 to 3 after 2-year intervention for 营养包 since the age of 6 months until 24 months. And then we find out stunting reduction from 23% to 7.7%. So it's really very effective. And anemia reduction is about 30 to 50% reduced. And very interesting is that disease prevalence. And we have this 2-week disease incidence study. We find out in a large-scale trial, we found that the diarrhea incidence for 2-week incidence reduced about 50 to 80%.
Wow.
So that made very, very effective. And also for the fever incidence, same. And then the cost for the disease therapy treatment, it's used to be 173 yuan per 2 weeks. And then after 1-year intervention, it went down to 33 yuan. So it's very big one reduction. And if for the fever, then you can find out used to be expenses 288 yuan. And then after 1-year intervention, it went to 73 yuan. So this is a very big improvement. So in that case, we have Dr. Lu Mai had this recommendation to the government for policy making. So this is the policy making in China is really very good for in 2012, the Ministry of Health took up the program, which is supported by the central government for 100 million yuan for 100 counties, poor counties. And then all the children aged of 6 months off, over 6 months to 24 months, they get every day 1 pack of 营养包 free. So in that case, we have 100,000 yuan, and now in 2013 to 14, we have about 300 million yuan for 300 counties in 21 provinces. So it covers about 80 to 820,000 children age of 6 months. So this is a great policy making in China. So we think that will be very good for us since we have the cost-benefit analysis, which means that if you use 营养包, then you have a cost-benefit ratio is 1.1 to 11. So it is very effective. So in this case, we think this good for us to use it. But this is only a beginning of the nutrition policy. It is a beginning, so we have challenges. The challenge is how to make this policy sustainable. If you have no sustainable, then if a program goes gone, then everything gone. So we have to do the sustainability study in China to find out what will be the mechanism for such distribution. Is it possible to integrate such program into the national healthcare reform system so that we can put it into the public service, general public service to the people? That means we have all these things being sustainable. For us in the future, collaboration with U.S., I think we have how to make the policy sustainable is one of the major problems we have to do it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Rob, I want to ask you about the role of the private sector. You have a lot of interesting experience in what you describe as state business, what we often call as public-private partnerships. So can you share some of the experience, and is there a special niche for the private sector, and are there lessons that you think that are relevant coming out of the United States experience, lessons that are relevant for other countries?
Yeah, thank you, David, and thanks to the China Development Research Foundation, Lu Mai. I am a fan of yours, as you know, and thanks to Brookings, always a leader in many, many ways. Thanks to the panelists. I'm looking forward to your remarks. Let me say that the business sector's role in early child development comes about as a result of fundamental awareness. In the United States, there have been numerous major business leaders who have advocated for early child development, prenatal to 5 or 0 to 3 or pre-kindergarten, universal pre-kindergarten, and the rest. For the most part, you can see the business community's areas of support follow what has been disclosed from research. The more recent brain research and even the research into the importance of prenatal health for a child's life productivity is increasingly causing the business sector to be open to supporting 0 to 3 home visiting kinds of policies, and even prenatal counseling and interventions before birth. The key here is that the business sector, particularly the larger corporate entities, have to plan over very long periods of time. Companies that are electrical power generation companies, companies that are involved in building airplanes or railroads, these kinds of companies have to plan over very long periods of time. It's simply not the case that most of the business sector of the United States is sort of like the hedge fund sector, which is just thinking in a matter of 90 days or 30 days. These businesses have to think over very long periods of time. They have to think about their workforces. And what many of them know in the United States is that there actually are not enough kids to be graduated with good education who will be able to fill the ranks of the retiring baby boomers who are retiring at a rate of 100,000 a month. I am absolutely certain that the business sector in China is very much supportive of what is happening in nutrition and policy generally. I tend to believe that these kinds of policies actually don't occur until the business sector is broadly comfortable with them. I believe that probably in China, I've not traveled there in a number of years, though let me say, I have, during the years in which I was working as a partner in a very large financial company, I traveled all over China. I've been to all the cities of the branch banks of the People's Bank of China. So they're just like the Federal Reserve. There are many of them, and I've been all over China, traveled there extensively for 15 to nearly 20 years. From my perspective, the business community has a lot of influence over what happens in China. And the business community, in part, the increased focus on what is happening in early child development does reflect a growing business sector awareness of the inequality that exists between rural and urban, particularly well-educated urban, and the instabilities, the risks that allowing these inequalities and large numbers of people to be malnourished and undereducated, these risks are simply not business risks that they want to take. This is the case in the United States. As the research has indicated, the importance of prenatal and early 0 to 3 brain development and personality development. As this research has become more and more powerful, the business community in the United States has become more open to being supportive, but a key feature of this support is the driving political, almost civil resistance on the part of working class and middle class families for feeling that their children are not being, their families are not receiving the attention that they should from the society as a whole. In many respects, what we see in terms of Tea Party resistance is a sense on the part of hundreds of millions of Americans that their families and their life prospects and life success outlooks of their children are not being given a fair chance by their government. And as a consequence, they are resisting. And their resistance may seem crude and unfortunate, but nevertheless, they're sending a very important message, which we as a society have to respond to. And I think that this is, in China, a friend tells me there are 10,000 civil events across China. These are anything from just a group of people coming to protest something at a local regional government. But in any case, there are people across China who are asserting their concern about their family well-being and the well-being of their children. The business community of China is respectful of this, and I think that we will see more and more business involvement. Now, you ask about private sector, public-private partnerships. I'll just say a word in the time that's left on that. I co-founded an organization called Ready Nation. Ready Nation does work in microeconomics of early childhood intervention, the sort of macroeconomics. We've proven, in effect, that increasing per capita income is best done by investing in kids prenatal to 5. We've looked at the sort of sector. Many of us talk about the auto sector or the banking sector. There is a human capital sector. This is all the people that are involved in producing the most important good that is produced by any society, and that's educated young adults who are ready for life. This is an economic sector, just like the banking sector or the auto sector or the airline sector. It is an economic sector that produces a product on which all these other sectors depend. This sector is huge. In the United States, it's over 1/3 of the population is involved in raising kids, feeding children, making goods and services that children use. Huge sector. So that was the third area, sector definition. Fourth was finance. If all of these things are so good at the high rates of return to nutrition, early education, parent training, and the rest, if these returns are so high, how do we pay for them? And in this work, Ready Nation is the leader in the development of pay-for-success social impact finance applied to early childhood. And last area is, where should our advocacy be focused? We obviously decided that the business sector is where our attention should be directed. We have worked with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, numerous business groups at the state and federal level, and what I'm really delighted to say is that last year, if we had asked, in fact, we did ask, can we get a letter from chief executives and other chief financial officers and others of major corporations, would you sign a letter in support of increased early childhood investment? We would have gotten about 5 people. This year, we got nearly 40. So what's happening is the work of educating this community is happening, plus the work generally of people around the world and in the United States on the necessity of focusing on early childhood in order to get children on a proper and strong life trajectory. We have developed a Pay-for-Success project in Salt Lake City where we can show that providing pre-kindergarten, 3- and 4-year-old pre-kindergarten, reduces special education grade retention and English language learner costs enough to pay for the pre-K in the first place. So Goldman Sachs has made a loan to provide an expansion of pre-K. The Pritzker Foundation has come in and provided funds for the setup. And the Salt Lake City United Way Foundation has come in as the sort of ultimate risk absorber. So we have a capital structure, which is a pay-for-success one, in that the reduction in special education costs will come back and pay Goldman Sachs back with interest. Question, will Salt Lake City County do this again in future years? Well, it turns out, obviously, if it works, they will issue their own bonds. They will not borrow from Goldman Sachs. They will not need to. So this is an educational process which, interestingly, the most important thing about this, David, is that the business sector is in essence now teaching the public sector that these interventions reduce remediation costs so much that you can pay for the initial investment in children at the outset and get the return with interest. Similarly, in South Carolina, we have a project underway for prenatal and home visiting. Here, we expect that the reductions in intensive care costs, neonatal intensive care and emergency room visits, reductions in early birth and low birth weight births would be enough to pay for the intervention in the first place again. So let me stop there, and we'll explore those ideas further.
Thank you. That was really fascinating. And you know, one of the issues you brought up is good link between the U.S. and China, and a good link to our next speaker, because you mentioned that the baby boomers, my generation is retiring. I've already retired twice myself, by the way. But my generation's retiring, and as you say, American businesses are concerned, you know, will there be the talent pool? Well, I have to say, China doesn't have the same problem quite yet, but China will have a very similar problem very soon. Very, you know, rapid aging of the population. People will start to retire. So one issue I worry about a lot, and this is the question we tried to pitch to Liu Yendong this morning, there's tens of millions of so-called left-behind children in China, which are children growing up in the countryside, but their parents have left for the cities. And they will be the heart of the workforce in the future. Because of aging, basically, the children who grow up in the countryside now are going to be the heart of the urban labor force in the future. So China very much faces the same issue maybe 10 years from now. Okay? But now my actual question for Jiang Jin is, you know, given your role in developing the pre-primary education policy in China, can you tell us a little bit about the pre-primary education policy? You know, what's been the achievement and the performance? But then I am particularly interested in this issue of how you reach the rural population, including the left-behind children. So, please.
Thank you, moderator. I'm very happy to be here to participate in this U.S. China dialogue on early childhood development. And earlier this morning, we've heard jointly from the two leaders from our country as well as other panelists. And I believe that those opinions and positions will be playing a very important role in promoting policies that are beneficial for ECD. So now I'm going to try to answer your question, Mr. Moderator. China is a developing nation with a huge population. So for China, when we are formulating our social and economic development policies, we need to pay attention to the issue of population, because that is a very big challenge to our government. So we need to translate this huge population burden into a largest human resource. We need to do a lot. That's why China has been prioritizing education ever since its reform and opening up period. We have been attaching great importance to education. For example, we have made a universal mandatory 9-year education as a basic policy, and we have been trying to promote education equality in all over China. In terms of primary education, China has introduced several important measures. One is in 2010, the State Council issued its medium to long-term education plan and guideline. In this plan, China has set up the goal of making pre-elementary education universal in China by 2020. And in this plan, there are also very detailed steps. It has made the goal very clear, and it has also included specific responsibilities for different parts of the government, and it also mentioned the rural area as its priority. So this 2020 goal is another important milestone since China made the 9-year education mandatory. So that's the first measure, which is this goal of 2020, making the pre-elementary education universal. The second measure is another State Council document, which is entitled Several Opinions on How to Promote Pre-Elementary Education. So there are 10 opinions actually in total. And the biggest advantage of these 10 opinions is to set the main goal and the main directions. Several principles are mentioned in this document. It'll have to have universal coverage, and the difference between rural and urban areas will have to be eliminated. And the Chinese government has also pledged to invest more of government funding in these efforts and to strengthen supervision at all levels as well. And the concept of interdepartmental coordination and cooperation has also been raised in this document. So this document is the roadmap for the next 10 years on how to further promote pre-elementary education. So that is the second measure I wanted to mention. The third measure is in order to implement these new policies, the State Council has called on the different counties at the local level to take up a 3-year action plan. So the main purpose of this 3-year action plan at the county level is aimed at implementing the national level policies on a grassroots level. So they want the different counties to take up the lead in formulating their own 3-year action plans. So within 6 months, over 2,800 counties all over China, based on their own specific circumstances and based on their own local demand, each county came up with their own 3-year action plan as well as annual goals, and they have also designed several programs and projects at the local level. So we believe that this 3-year action plan is actually a very important tool in ensuring the implementation of a important strategic national policy. So recently we have conducted some evaluation on the implementation of the 3-year action plan because it has been about 3 years. And we think that the 3-year action plan initiative has played a very important role in promoting our efforts. We believe that it has played an unprecedented role in increasing attention level and investment level. And this was at the local level and the national level. And we have seen an unprecedented amount of relevant government policies introduced to achieve that goal. So through the 3-year action plan initiative, we have seen an increase of kindergartens at a rate of 30% nationwide. And during those 3 years, we have also seen a growth of the total number of children in those kindergartens, or preschools rather, and the amount increased over those past 3 years surpassed the amount increased over the past 10 years. The number of the percentage of children attending preschool increased to 64.5% from 50.9%. And at the grassroots level, in order to implement those 3-year action plan initiatives, on the national level, we have introduced 8 important projects, and they're focusing on 4 areas. One is to support the preschool development in the western part of the country, and within that effort, there are 4 projects. One is to build more local community level and village level preschools. So on that project was actually touched upon by Vice Premier Liu. She mentioned that we have an addition of 4,700 preschools at village level or community level. And the second aspect is to increase the affiliated preschools at the village elementary schools. So that is to leverage the resources of the village elementary schools and to use existing resources in order to expand preschool education. That is a very cost-effective measure. So that's the second tactic, so to speak. And the third one is to encourage the existing rural preschools to expand so as to be able to accommodate more children. And the fourth measure is to use some sort of the informal measures to establish some mobile education stations at the remote and mountainous regions so that the volunteers and teachers from nearby communities or localities can provide temporary services at those mobile stations. So these are the 4 sort of tactics in trying to expand the preschools. And the second aim is at filling the gap in the urban area. So in urban area, we have some preschools affiliated with businesses or some local communities. And so we want to expand the number of that kind of preschools to satisfy the need of migrant workers. So those are supported by the the policies introduced at the local level and supported by the funding provided by local governments. And that's the second intermediate point. And the third is to establish a funding or a financial assistance mechanism, which is to provide financial assistance to poor families or orphans so that they can be eligible for free preschool education. And lastly, well, actually, during the past 3 years, according to some preliminary statistics, after the introduction of these 8 strategic or major projects, we invested over 105 million RMB and benefited over 16 million children. So quality is also an important concern when we try to boost pre-elementary education. So on one hand, we developed a guideline, education guideline for children between the ages of 3 and 6 to provide more some guidance to teachers and caregivers. And in addition to that, we also have introduced an initiative of that's called Awareness Promotion Month. Every year we will designate 1 month during which we will try to increase awareness among parents on the importance of early childhood education. And during this month, the education departments at all levels will be mobilized and to participate in this effort. Another measure we have taken is to train teachers. We have dedicated special funding from the central government budget to train rural teachers and preschool teachers. We also have some numbers for that. Over the past 3 years, over 70% of preschool teachers nationwide receive some sort of training.
And we're working harder with legislation in these areas, as well as the whole system of administration for preschool education. And in the legislative process right now, we are on the agenda going forward for our NPC. And in the past few years, our Ministry of Education has put out new standards for the training of teachers in the preschool arena. And we have now, also have regulations coming out of the NDRC in the future, and we will be revising some of the regulations regarding what needs to be there for all of these preschools. And we need it to be more standardized, and we need to have better oversight of all of those preschools and nursery schools. Policy-wise, from the perspective of our government, we need to do better in terms of carrying out them, but we definitely have made a lot of progress in recent years. We are a very populous country, and we know right now that our challenges are very steep, very tough. But overall, we know that we've continued to improve despite all of that, including not enough resources, because right now, we have only a 64.5% of the kids who are enrolled in preschool, so we've got that advantage there to get those other 35% in there. And we also have a misallocation of resources. Our public preschools are not enough, and also there's way too much of a difference and disparity between what's going on in the countryside and the cities and the poor and the rich areas. So also, with this very rapid development of preschool education, we don't have enough preschool teachers, so we haven't been able to train enough of them quick enough to get them out there to work in the preschool. So we need to have more things out there to attract teachers into this profession, including raising their salaries and other things. So what we're thinking about in this area is that, especially in this year, this will be the first of the implementation years for our new plan, and we will continue to move forward going into the second phase. I'm almost finished, sorry. Looking at it from the second phase, we're going to be putting more into it, more resources, but at the same time as that, we also are going to try to have sustainability in preschool education. We're going to try to do research into what we can do to make it sustainable, and we hope we can exchange more with the United States in that area, because I know that in early childhood development, you in the United States started out very early. You have a lot of different experiences, and I know that you have Head Start, and I know that Head Start has a long history. It's older than I am, Head Start. So I really hope that we will have more opportunities to learn from your experiences in the United States. Thank you.
So as I said, we really have a fantastic wealth of experience here. We have time certainly to take a few questions from the audience, and I would like to solicit all the questions and then basically give each panelist a little time to answer questions and any final comments. This gentleman in the back.
Normal University. 3 years ago, I worked in the Ministry of Civil Affairs as a Director General. I just want to ask Chairman Robert about, this is a story. Not is a story, is even the 11 years ago, one American children, just 11 years old, studied in Beijing. But his name is Matthew Dalio. His father is an American rich people, Dalio. This is Ray Dalio. He found Chinese, even the Beijing's orphan and disabled children's problem. He do a program. Then after that, he supported the established the American citizen established a foundation named Half the Sky and do a China Care program. Then cooperation with the Ministry of Civil Affairs. Now there are more than 1,070 staffs cares Chinese disabled children. Is do the early education and other program. This is the biggest Chinese NGO, actually, even in China, including Chinese NGO. This is a very, very famous story in China. But we find, within do the program, we find a lot of challenge. The big challenges in China so far, it's this big country, but no one professor for 0 to 3 years old education. We must invite the American professor, even 80 years old, to China, do education.
No, he's only 70.
This is
Jim and I are the same age.
Yes, this is now I want to ask, I deeply involved in this program because in the Ministry of Civil Affairs I work. I'm so moved, but I find in the American society, actually, most people don't know this story. I want to ask the Robert, what about your plan about cooperation with China, with Chinese rich people or philanthropists, do a same program in China or find the partnership? I just want Rob.
this lady over here.
Okay, thank you for the wonderful co-presentation. So my name is Liu Tong. I'm the Executive Director of Yale China Program on Child Development at Ziegler Edward Center, so Child Development and Social Policy in Yale University. So this question is for Larry. So I know you were Ziegler Fellow. So and just now Miss Jiang Jin, she mentioned the Head Start. So I want to say, how do you think about the effective methods to improve the quality of pre-K in China, especially for that in rural areas? Thank you.
Thank you. This lady here.
I'm Chen Yinying. In English, it's Yunying Chen. From China National Institute for Education Research, and I'm a specialist on child development and developmental disability. I'm the former founder of Special Education Division for the National Institute. And in such a very precious occasion that I think the one dialogue is very important between U.S. and China in partnership is that in China, there are many government sectors involved in ECD. And everybody is taking one bite of it, of a child, okay? So I always wonder, is that a way that we can find how to seek a more holistic development of a child or more inclusive program that everybody can see the other side and share the resources while everybody is talking about sustainable development in policy making. And I found this is very interesting while China side that Professor Chen represent medical model, and Madame Jiang Jin represent educational sector. So in debate of more medical model, more social model, that it's a time that we should have some sort of a more focus on how all this pool of intelligence and resources can all put together, as we may name it, as a holistic approach, looking at the child development, also looking at more family-oriented and community-based services. And I think my question for our friends in New York University, and I forgot most of your name.
Doug, it means big brother.
Yeah, okay. For our friends, not for Chinese.
No, actually, I'm going to direct your questions to our two Chinese panelists.
Yes,
okay?
I think that's
Yeah, so I'm afraid in the interest of time, I think I'm going to go back to the panelists, but I'm going to interpret that last question as being directed at Professor Chen and at Madame Jiang Jin about, because I had the same question. You know, China often has very effective programs in particular sectors, like nutrition program or education program. But I wonder about the collaboration across the sectors, and so that's how I interpret it. And of course, it's not just China. I worked in the U.S. government, and we had lots of problems of non-cooperation across silos. So it's a general, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. So I'm going to go first to Professor Chen, and then Rob and Larry, there is each one question for each of you, so you can think about how you want to spin that into a concluding short remark. But everybody has to be pretty brief now. So, Professor Chen.
Yes, I would say that as a nutritionist, I've been working on nutrition for 60 years. But my worry was that the nutrition knowledge always in the paper, not for the people's action. So that is why we have a collaboration with Dr. Lu Mai, because the nutritionists should cooperate with the economists and the socialists, all these people together, to study about what is the importance of the early childhood nutrition security, so that can be upgraded into this as a social issue and also is a manpower development issue. So I think this is collaboration is so important that after 60 years, I found this one is going to be a nutrition policy because of our collaboration with different sectors.
Okay, thank you. Madam Zhang Jin?
This is what I think. I think that ECD needs collaboration across different departments, but also it's very specific and specialized in different areas. So I think what we should do is we should have the government take the lead, but the work should be split according to different experts doing different things. We worked a long time ago with the Ministry of Health in rural, poor areas. We worked on ECD services. And I think the key is that you have to know who's doing what. You have to be clear, and then you have to communicate better between you. It doesn't matter what department or ministry it is. You can't do it all on your own. Actually, in China, there are a lot of things that are actually already underway like that. For instance, looking at, parenting and development in the early days, in the early stages, we have already had the support of the Ministry of Health, stuff in that area. We've got experts who come from the Ministry of Health to the preschools. So we need resources to be coordinated and shared, but the key is that we have to be careful. We have to know clearly who's in charge of what. 谢谢.
Thank you. Boy, the most important questions come up at the end. I think the issue of integration is incredibly important, both at the practice level and at the policy level. At the level of early childhood goal that I was talking about, it has to be multi-sectoral. I mean, children don't walk around as a body or just a mind or just an emotion. They are a whole creature, and so the policy and practice has to be that. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I think we could learn a lot between countries in integrated policy and practice in early child development. My belief is anti-poverty policy is early childhood policy. Various kinds of women's mental health policy is early childhood policy, and it needs to be joined up in that way. In terms of the issues related to rural poverty and how to address early childhood care and education in rural China, I would only say that some of our biggest challenges in the United States are in our southern states, the states that live with the historical legacy of slavery in this country, that are among the poorest states in the country. And so we have very significant rural poverty, and poverty where it's a challenge to have the kind of joined up activities. But also, here's another place where China and the United States could cooperate, because the mass migration from rural areas to cities and the market demand for early care is enormous in Africa. There will be a study released relatively soon which indicate that, for instance, in Accra, Ghana, and in Nairobi, Kenya, in African slums, 80-something% of children are in early child care programs. 80-something%. But they are programs that are not usually at all developmentally appropriate. They are attempting to teach children to read at 2. And there's not a holistic approach to that development. So if the U.S. and China could cooperate on rural challenges and the migration of households from rural areas to urban slums, that would be an issue of significance to each country, but of great international significance as well.
Rob, you get the final word.
Oh, well, thank you. In the introduction about me, there was not much emphasis on another line of work that I'm involved in with Jim Heckman and Stephen Durloff and Lou Mai, a project called the Human Capital and Economic Opportunity Working Group of INET, Institute for New Economic Thinking. That's about 400 researchers on all aspects: nutrition, prenatal care, early education, all of them looking at different dimensions of what it takes to get a child ready for school and a child through the elementary, middle, and high school education processes. Now, to the gentleman's questions, Ray Dalio is a remarkable man. Set up a remarkable program. Your question is, there seems to be so many people in the United States who are researching this, but not many people in China doing this kind of work. I actually disagree. We held a conference in which Lu Mai was one of our major speakers. We held a conference in June in collaboration with the University of Chicago Center in Beijing, in which there were large numbers of students, graduate students, others who were interested in researching early child development. So I personally believe that while China at this point may not have Nobel Prize winners like Jim Heckman who are focusing on this question, I am absolutely certain that the project that was first started by Professor Lu Mai in 2007, which is now a 270,000 child project being managed by the government and essentially looking at issues of nutrition and parenting, that study is going to educate the entire world. And it is going to educate tens of thousands of Chinese practitioners and researchers. I have every expectation that in the near future, any panel, any discussion involving early child development will have very large representation by Chinese researchers and thinkers and policymakers who have learned from this very large study that's now underway, and the rest of the world will learn from it also. So I think that the process of shared information back and forth between, at this point, let's say, the United States, the leading technological capital country in the world, and at this point, China, most rapidly developing human capital development process in the world. I think the sharing of information is going to be mutually beneficial to everyone in the world. And I can tell you from having been chairman of a project in Tanzania, one of the poorest African countries, for 8 years, taking a project from infancy to being recognized the #1 ecotourism destination in the world over the space of that 8-year period. I am telling you, America may be first, and Europe and America, and maybe Japan in the leading part of the world, and China and India are coming along. Well, right behind them is Latin America, and behind them is Africa, because Africa is coming. And even though they may not be developmentally appropriate in terms of literacy and so forth, they are trying their best to do it, and they are going to do it.
And the parents are hungry for it.
That's exactly right. So there's
and the
an
market
energy.
is responding.
It's an energy, and this energy is going to result in tens of thousands of people in China. And I would bet several hundred of the world's top experts in early child development will be Chinese within 5, 10, 15 years, Lu Mai? Easily.
Okay, don't move. So we need to do 3 things. First, let's give this panel a nice round of applause. Second, Professor Lu Mai will give you 1 minute to say thanks, but I want to speak for the John L. Thornton China Center and say that we've been thrilled to cooperate in this event, and part of the role of the China Center is to bring parts of Brookings that are not directly working on China, our early childhood development people, for example, together with Chinese researchers. So I've just learned a tremendous amount and really enjoyed this. And now Professor Lu Mai truly gets the last word.
Thank you, David. I think we learn a lot from this half-day seminar. One is that this is a very important issue, started from Liu Yandong and Hillary. We understand, all of us, why we're here, because it's important. The children's potential, we need to realize that for the poverty alleviation, for the equity, for the future. Second, this ECD need a collaboration among the different sector, academia, government official, business society, media, international organization, and the non-profit organization. In this room, we all represent one of this role. But if we work together, we can help children in the future. Third, we learned that it's common interest between U.S. and China for the earlier child development. This is starting, but not ended the conversation, not the ended of the discussion. In the future, we will see more cooperation. We've already started, like with James Heckman, Professor James Heckman, and today with Brookings. But in the future, I believe this kind of the cooperation will become from a different level, government, civil society, academia. So we're looking forward for that. On behalf of CDRF, I should say thanks Brookings, thanks for Mr. Thornton's leadership, thanks Tama, David, and Kelly, and all of Brookings person. We worked intensively in last month, and thanks for everybody to come and stay to the end. So, thank you.